I was born and raised in Egypt. Cairo is my home. I love it here. My name is Hossam Abu Makr. I'm a video journalist and my work takes me all over the world. I have worked for the Arabs at Al Jazeera, the Brits at the BBC, and for the Americans at the Discovery Channel and for PBS. No matter how beautiful the world can be, I always look forward to coming home. I'm 35 years old and married to an American woman. We have 2 young daughters. This is the way I see where I live. This is the way much of the rest of the world thinks of the Middle East. The stereotype that it's all violence here is wrong. Actually, there is less extremism in Egypt today than in the past. The government will take credit for this change, but their aggression is not the answer. Several years ago, I was beaten, my arm broken, and my camera destroyed as I covered parliamentary elections. I do not accept their harsh methods. I believe in free speech and completely free elections. But there's something else, an important story which is going uncovered in my view, one with big implications. Some radical Islamic groups have reformed their ways and apologized, and now seek an end to violence. This makes me wonder if violent attacks here have lessened because some extremists have become more moderate. Is there a lesson in this for others in the Middle East? Like most Arabs, I'm moderate in my politics, and I'm a devout Muslim. I am angry about the level of extremism in this part of the world. Like everyone I know, I want it stopped. It upsets me that the radical fringe has hijacked my religion. Islam is a religion of peace, no matter how violent others make it seem. There's a growing group of people who I think have a particularly interesting point of view about extremism, even if they are in the minority. I call them ex-extremists, people who used to promote violence but now practice moderation. And they're not just in Egypt. So over the course of several years, I set out to meet some of them, beginning in Cairo, then moving to Upper Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and the Gaza Strip, to discover if these people are for real. And if so, can we learn from them? Or is this just a ruse for them to radicalize a population by less violent means? I was most anxious to interview منتصر الزيات, a 51-year-old defense lawyer who is a board member of the Egyptian Lawyers Syndicate. منتصر is well known here. He defends high-profile people, mostly Islamists. That Egyptian cleric who was kidnapped by the CIA agents in Italy several years ago, منتصر الزيات represented him and got him out of jail. But the منتصر الزيات I knew had been part of the plot to assassinate the late President Anwar Sadat, my hero, and I was nervous to ask him about this. When I was 9 years old, I was chosen to give flowers to Sadat one day when he visited my home in the Delta. Then, a few months later, when I was watching the 6th of October Victory Parade on television, I was horrified to see Sadat assassinated as he stood at attention. I honestly believe that if Sadat had not been killed, and people had listened to him back then, about peace with Israel in particular, this world would be a different place today. At the start of our first interview, more than 2 years ago, Muntasser El-Zayat made me a promise.
In the name of Allah, the Almighty, I will say the truth.
So I got right to the point and asked him about the assassination.
Deep inside, Sadat hated the Islamic movements and teachings. As the regime in Egypt was not implementing the rules of Islam, it meant that it had to be eliminated. Such a regime, to us, was considered illegitimate, and we had to resist it, work on changing it by heart, tongue, or hand, as per the teachings of Islam. We reached the point of no return with President Sadat after we learned about his decision to arrest many Islamic leaders. We ran away and made the decision to finish him off.
El-Zayat received a communication that the assassination would take place on October 6, 1981. His role was to occupy government offices in Aswan once the shooting was over.
It was planned for one group to take control over the national radio station. A second was assigned to take over the headquarters of the army leadership. And a third was supposed to seize the national TV building. However, due to bad arrangements, these attempts ended in failure, and then the whole plan fell apart. I then tried to leave the country, but the police were faster arresting me.
He was thrown in jail with hundreds of others, including Ayman Zawahiri, the Egyptian doctor who became a terrorist and second in command to Osama bin Laden.
I found out, after meeting with Ayman Zawahiri, that he is a person one can establish a relation with. He is a very polite, well-mannered, and a good-hearted man. The human qualities in his character certainly don't reflect the violent directions of his ideology. However, after a few minutes of discussion with Ayman, anyone can tell that he adopts revolutionary thoughts.
Now, we want to speak to the whole world. Who are we? We are Muslims. We are Muslims who believed in their religion. We tried our best to establish this Islamic state and Islamic society. La ilaha illallah! La ilaha illallah! We suffered the severest inhuman treatment. There, they kicked us, they beated us, they whipped us with the electric cable, they shocked us with electricity, and they used their wild dogs, and they hanged us over the edges of the doors with our hands tied at the back. There they arrested the wives, the mothers, the fathers, the sisters, and the sons in a trial to put a psychological press over these innocent prisoners. خيبر خيبر يا يهود خيبر خيبر يا يهود.
أي فرصة للتعاطف أو التفاهم.
He was certainly in favor of the replacement of the regime from day one. He wasn't prepared to give any chance whatsoever for any mutual understanding with the regime. This is how we got to know Ayman al-Zawahiri in prison.
The arrest also included the most influential Islamist at the time, the leader of Jama Islamiyah, Sheikh Omar Abdul Rahman, the blind sheikh. Muntasser looked to Rahman as his spiritual father, and as Rahman and Zawahiri argued about the best means to overthrow the government, Muntasser listened.
I tried to persuade Zawahiri to moderate his attacks on Sheikh Rahman, but he refused to back down.
Al-Zayat was in prison for 3 years. Lots of time to debate and lots of time to think and read as well. And he started to moderate his views.
The time we spent at prison was very harsh, and the feeling of defeat was bitter. Prison gave us time to read. We didn't used to read before that. Before we went to jail, we jumped to conclusions. We looked for proofs to justify our actions. We used to look for reasons to increase our dispute with the society, the regime, and to justify the use of force. I believe reading, together with accumulated unpleasant experiences, have made me realize that much of what we were doing was incorrect.
منتصر الزيات would eventually be released from prison along with Zahiri and Sheikh Brahman. Each would go his separate way. Sheikh Rahman would mastermind the attack on the World Trade Center in 1993 and would be convicted 3 years later. Ayman Zawahiri joined forces with Osama bin Laden and would become the brains behind Al-Qaeda.
أنا استمرارا لما خلصت إليه أثناء فترة سجني ومحاكمتي في قضية اغتيال السادات أو بعد اغتيال السادات.
After I got out of jail, I tried to convince young generations to stop trying to use Islamic law as an excuse for their violent actions. I did what I was convinced of, paying no attention to the threats demanding me to stop my efforts. In 1997, I managed, along with some others, to convince a number of Muslim groups, including Jama Islamiyah, to end their violent operations. This was way before September 11th attacks, which caused me deep sorrow, as I knew it was perpetrated by Al-Qaeda. I also said that the September attack